What's up, everybody? I am Walter Benaziac, and this is Tamara's Never Seen. Today, I'm watching Big Fish for the first time. So I've heard a lot about this movie for a long time. I've never seen it because it's this Tim Burton movie that a lot of people have suggested to me, and it doesn't seem like a regular Tim Burton movie. You know, like when I think Tim Burton, I think of Beetlejuice, the first two Batman movies, Edward Scissorhands, you know, those kind of films. This is a much more, or at least it seems like, before watching it, a much more straightforward film than his more outlandish, crazy things like, you know, the movies that I just mentioned and like the animated stuff like Corpse Bride or even Frankenweenie. So we're doing top 5 best and worst Tim Burton movies, and I had to watch this one because a lot of people think that this is either one of his best or his best movie. Now, after seeing Ed Wood for the first time, I don't think that's going to be possible, but it could change my mind. So, let's get into Big Fish right now. That was a tearjerker. If there's one word or a phrase I could use to describe that, that one brought tears out of my eyes. A very effective father-son story in the end, but it's surrounded by all these fantastical things happening, so I can see how Tim Burton added his own flair to this because it's not just a straightforward thing like I thought it was going to be. It is very whimsical, but also has some supernatural elements to it because the character that Albert Finney plays, who just passed away unfortunately, is this big storyteller, and he exaggerates everything that he, you know, tells a story about. Every event in his life he makes bigger and more grand in the stories that he tells to other people. And we get to see a lot of those fantastical elements play out on screen, and they all have a kernel of truth to them, which is, you know, the point of the movie is that there's sort of like this center of all these stories, all these crazy things happen, but at the center there is a little bit of truth that he's telling. So I could see how Tim Burton lended his style to those kind of elements of the movie. And overall, I definitely say it's very enjoyable. I will say through the first maybe 30% of the movie, I was like, you gotta convince me a little bit more before I really got into it. It felt like just a book. I know it's based on a book, but it just felt like a live-action book without any room for artistic expression from the filmmaker. It just felt like we're just doing the book, which can work sometimes, but this, it just felt like someone just reading to me straight out of a book, which is like great because narration can work really well sometimes, but also like the words and phrasing they were using just felt like how someone would describe something in a book. And you know, a book is not a movie, it's a visual medium. You need to show me what's happening instead of explaining things. So this did well later on, but first off, when I was, you know, watching it for those first, I don't know, 20 minutes or whatever, I was a little like, I don't know. But then it got really good. And what really drew me into it was when we saw Albert Finney's character as a young man, which is played by the ever-charming Ewan McGregor. Obi-Wan, he was great. The best smile of a man I've ever seen. The most charming guy one of at least, that I've seen on screen. I mean, he's just so likable. He also has not aged at all. I just saw him in Christopher Robin, which came out over the summer, I think. He looks exactly the same as he did in this movie. This movie came out in 2003. That was, what, 15 years ago now? That's crazy, man. This is also right after Episode 2 came out for Star Wars, so he's still in kind of the Star Wars mode. But he doesn't have, you know, the beard that he had in Episode 2 or the longer hair or anything like that. He's just Ewan McGregor. He looks just like this happy-go-lucky, never-ending positive guy who has like a bottomless pit of happiness is what I could describe him as in this movie. Billy Crudup plays Albert Finney's son in this, and he never really liked his dad, or just didn't, not that he didn't like him, he just didn't understand him. So, you know, he always heard his dad tell these crazy, fantastical stories, and he wanted to know the truth. His dad is likely dying in this film, so he wants to find out what is happening, or what happened in the past for real. He wants to know the real stories, and his dad is just not willing to tell him those real stories because as they say in the movie, he is those fantastical versions of that story, of any story that he tells. So he is like exaggerated, he is larger than life, and he doesn't want to be anything less than that to his son. So it's this interesting conflict of what the father wants to be known as to his son and what the son wants to find out about the father. So it's this interesting conflict that we see, and it really tugs at your heartstrings. To skip to sort of the middle and the end of this, with Billy Crudup's character trying to get more of the truth out of him, and even going to other people who would be more willing to tell him about what, these stories, how they actually played out in real life than how his dad told him. He was kind of obsessed with knowing who his dad really was, and by the end, like I said, he really is his stories. And the scene at the end, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't seen this, which I would absolutely recommend. If you haven't checked it out, definitely watch that movie without anyone spoiling it for you. The ending where the father is dying, and Billy Crudup's character he's right next to him. He's the only person in the hospital with him, and he looks like he has another heart attack or something, and he's slipping away. And he had a stroke, I think, some kind of medical issue, and he was about to die in the hospital. There's no one else around. Billy Crudup was about to call the nurse, but the dad doesn't want him to, and he asks him, like, what happened with the day he was born. That's kind of what all this was centered around. What really happened the day he was born, because the big fish and all that, the title of the movie is tied into the exaggerated version of this story that the dad tells. He's looking at him and he can barely talk. He kind of lost the movement in his face because of the stroke. And he says that you tell the story. So Billy Crudup right there makes up the story that he thinks his dad would have told. And he's also a writer. Billy Crudup's character is a writer who, I think he's a fiction writer. So he also writes stories, but he doesn't tell them aloud like his dad did. So he comes up with this story on the spot as his dad is dying, and just tears rolling down his face. And just how he explained what was happening, just lifting him up out of his bed, and he was light as a feather, and he didn't know why, and he brought him down to that lake or river area where the big fish was, and all of his friends, it's the convergence of characters, all of his friends throughout his life and family were there, and he lays him in the water, he turns into the big fish, and he just swims away. It's very sad. And then we flash back to reality, and the colors are desaturated, everything is back to kind of what real life would more look like, less fantastical, less colorful, and he slips away kind of with, I don't know if it was a smile on his face, but you could tell he was happy. I think anybody can relate to this, just having a father, or the lack of a father, or anything like that. We all come from some kind of family, and to see that played out, especially with the father-son dynamic, anybody can put yourself in those shoes and get some kind of emotional resonance out of it. And it was tough to watch in a good way, just in a way that drew emotion out of you, and to really try and appreciate what we have with our fathers, or what we did have with our fathers, or father figures. It's important to be present in those moments, because we never know when those are going to fade away. So I hope if you guys have seen this movie, it means a lot to you, because just seeing it for the first time, if I would have grown up with it, or if I saw it when I was a little bit younger, I definitely would have a bigger emotional attachment to it than I do now. Do I think it's better than Ned Wood? Well, check out the top 5 and see if I think that. I don't know. Yeah, this was a really, really good movie, and it's something that I would suggest for anyone to check out. It's a great family story, especially about fathers and sons, and also just about sort of exaggerated tales, and there's a lot of really fun elements in it. We get to see a really cool arc for the dad character as we see him grow, as Ewan McGregor in the past scenes grows from a younger man to a little bit of an older man, and he goes back to this town called Spectre. That's sort of like an allegory for heaven at first, and it's this hidden place, but then we find out it's a real place, and he goes back there and kind of buys up the town and rebuilds it, and that was kind of his life's calling that we saw play out. Second only to his son, because we see some other almost infidelity things kind of come up, and he didn't want to betray his wife and son, and family is really at the core, with sort of the outer shell of that being Spectre and wanting to save this town that he thought was amazing when he was younger. Steve Buscemi's also in it. There's a lot of like stars that you wouldn't expect to see in there. I think Danny DeVito was in there as well. There was a really great love story that we got to see play out with Ewan McGregor in the flashbacks, and who played, I don't even know, who played the mom in that movie? Jessica Lange from the younger days. So yeah, man, this is something I think you should see, and bring some Kleenex or tissue paper with you, whatever, because it might bring up a little bit of tears, deservingly so. So Big Fish is fantastic. Do I have to give a hair flip rating to this?
Ooh, give a hair flip rating, yeah.
Okay, if I were to give this something, I think I would give it, we're not doing 0.5s or anything like that, so it's got to be a solid number. I would round it up to 8 hair flips. So I don't have hair, but long enough hair. So let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my. That was intense. I like that. I know why she likes that one too. Thank you for watching this episode of Tamara's Never Seen. Make sure you tune in next week. Bye!
What are you doing here?
I'm watching Big Fish for Tamara's Never Seen.
But I've seen Big Fish. It's my favorite movie of all time. Wait, did you like it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.